The Prime Minister has named Canada's new fentanyl czar, part of an effort to fight against U.S. tariffs. And we've also just learned new details about the amount of tariffs that Canada could be facing. There are two deadlines coming up fast. First, the 30-day reprieve from President Donald Trump's blanket tariffs on Canadian goods that could end March 4th. And now, Trump has ordered separate 25% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum from March 12th. We've just learned from a White House official who has confirmed to CBC News on Background that those tariffs would be on top of the blanket tariffs, meaning the metal tariffs could total 50%. In the meantime, Trump keeps making more threats.
Canada has a very big car industry. They stole it from us. They stole it because our people were asleep at the wheel. If we don't make a deal with Canada, we're going to put a big tariff on cars, could be a 50 or 100%, because we don't want their cars. We want to make the cars in Detroit.
So, what is Ottawa's plan to escape these latest tariffs, and what is the strategy to stop the threats for good? François-Philippe Champagne is the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. Minister, thank you for being here today.
Pleasure to be with you.
Perhaps, but I think I was also the bearer of bad news just there about the stacking tariffs. As I said, CBC News having learned that on top of the potential for these 25% tariffs on virtually everything, 25% on steel and aluminum. Has anyone from Washington passed that information along to you, or are you learning it from us?
Allow me to focus on what we know for sure, because one thing we've learned in the last few weeks is to focus on what is signed by the president. You know, if that's what you've heard from the White House, let's wait until things are confirmed, because one thing you've learned and we've learned is that things tend to change. You know, yesterday, I was on the phone with CEOs of a steel company in the United States, and even them did not see that coming. And you know, what was the most telling comments that I've seen today is the CEO of Ford Motor Company, going back to what the president said. You know the two words he used? This tariff is going to bring chaos and costs to the American consumers. So chaos in terms of the well-established supply chain that exists, because I always say the Americans don't buy from Canada because they want to be nice. They buy from Canada what they need, and they need the steel from Canada. They need the aluminum from Canada. And at the same time, you say cost, because we've been saying all along, there cannot be tariff without impact, there cannot be tariff without consequences, and it cannot be tariff without cost. But now, what I felt from my meeting in Washington last week is that the tone is changing. Now it's American CEOs which are speaking up. Initially, they were talking to us on background. Now they're saying that for the Ford Motor Company CEO, to say that very publicly, chaos and cost, those are two powerful words that is sending out to make sure that Washington understands this is going to disrupt American manufacturing capacity, being less competitive, and I would say even be dangerous and diminish the capacity in terms of shipbuilding, in the aerospace industry, and the defense industry.
I appreciate your desire to be cautious when, as you say, the ground has clearly been shifting. But I would still ask you, what would your message be to, workers in the aluminum and steel industry, the people who are running these companies who may have heard here for the first time today this idea?
We're going to fight.
But 50% tariffs, like surely 25% was bad. That's going to...
We're going to fight, and honestly, what I hear from U.S. CEOs now, these type of tariffs would have a dramatic impact on U.S. capabilities in the United States. Let's remember that our steel and aluminum go into not only what is needed in America, but, for example, in critical supply chain for their national security. When you talk about shipbuilding and when you're talking about defense, I think you will have more and more voice in America. I had calls today, people are saying, hold on for a minute. This is going to affect our national security. And I'm sure that there will be more and more voice who are going to say, hold on for a minute. If you're doing that, America is going to have to deal with that, and that could impact the national security. And then, there's a nexus today between economic security and national security. And what we need is, like, the premiers are in Washington, but like we did last week, and we're going to continue in doubling down, we want more American voice to speak up and say this is going to be damaging to the economy of the United States.
At the same time, Donald Trump is saying no exemptions, no exceptions. How confident are you that Canada can get one, given that he has explicitly said that won't be the case.
Well, we have a history with them when it comes to tariff. You remember on steel and aluminum
It lasted almost a year last time.
In 2018.
Yeah.
But they realized two things. They realized that we were firm in our response and that these tariffs would impact U.S. industry.
Yet they did it again.
Well, listen, different time, but I think now more than ever, honestly, sometimes you have to say to our best friend in the United States and our ally, if you say no to Canada, who are you going to say yes to? The world is watching. This is very serious. And why I'm always coming back to the point of shipbuilding, of defense, is because those are key industries at a time where there's more turbulence in the world. We need to make sure we shore up our manufacturing capability. We talk a lot about military expenses that we'll have to do. I would call that investment. But in order to do that, we need to build up our capacity, our industrial capacity. But one thing, Canadians are resilient. CDAO in 1945 reinvented the industrial landscape of Canada. So, there's many things we can do in this country. We have a Canada Free Trade Agreement that we can do and that we're working on. We can have a Canada First procurement policy, so we favor Canadian company. We can diversify our industrial base. We've done it before in 1945. We can diversify our exports. We're the only G7 with a free trade with all other G7. And we can diversify our imports, because I always tell them, by the way, we buy more from the Americans than China, Japan, the UK, and France combined. We can buy from others as well. We can buy locally, but also from other markets.
I want to talk about not only how you'll respond in terms of policy that you've clearly laid out there, but you said yesterday Canada's response to tariffs would be clear and calibrated when it comes to the question of counter tariffs. And I appreciate weeks to go, we're not there yet. But if indeed we are facing this, is your argument right now dollar for dollar retaliation on these steel and aluminum tariffs, or are you does clear and calibrated mean something more targeted than dollar for dollar?
We are prepared to have a very robust response, but
so we
hope no. But I just say our mission today is to prevent the tariff, is to do what we did last time. You don't want to escalate.
You didn't prevent them last time.
No, but at least they're suspended for 30 days. We hope we're not going to have to go there. We're going to negotiate with them to provide. You cannot treat Canada like any other country, because the American industry, and I saw the interview before, but the reality, if you talk to CEOs, remove the politicians from the equation. If you talk to people who have to build stuff, if you talk to union leaders who know their members, they'll tell you, they don't buy from us just to be nice. They need that, because if they're importing from Canada steel and aluminum, it's because they need it for their own industry to be competitive and also to make America more secure in their supply chain. So my point would be, hopefully we don't have to get there, but one thing they know, we're going to be firm, we're going to be targeted, we're going to be strategic, and they know that because they've seen us last time. We've played in that movie. They understand that we are, the Prime Minister said it, we're laser focused on making sure that if we have to impose a retaliation, that it's gonna be in a place that it's gonna be felt by American consumers.
I'd like to zoom out and just understand a bit how you think of the big picture. Fox News, Trump saying if there's no deal with Canada, he will also put 50 to 100% tariffs on Canadian cars. He's mentioned semiconductors. Is this, to your mind, the economic force that Trump was talking about when he said he would use economic force to make Canada a 51st state? Are we already living that force?
We're taking it step by step, day by day, like you, in a way that we've seen. And by the way, it's not just Canada. I was talking to some partners around the world. People are watching because things are evolving.
He's pretty fixated on us, though.
Yes, but one thing I have to say is that by doing that, by bringing more uncertainty and insecurity and instability in the market, this is going to affect U.S. markets. It's going to affect U.S. consumer and U.S. industry. That's the kind of voice you start hearing and say, that kind of approach to the best friend and ally of the United States, the world is watching. If you're going to do that to your best friend and your best ally, obviously the world is going to be looking at that and say, you know what, we probably need to diversify. We probably need to form other partnership. And I think on our end, we will always trade with the Americans. But one thing that has happened is that the rules of the game have changed. And you know what? What he's done is galvanize Canadians. It's kind of a wake-up call for our country. Now we say things that look impossible are going to be possible. A free trade agreement, making sure that we have like a Canada First procurement policy, that we diversify our industry, our market. I think that he's galvanized. I've never seen Canada more united than today. And that show of force, I think, is being noticed not only south of the border, but around the world, because they know that we're resilient. We're Canadian.
You say best friend. He has threatened not to protect us militarily. He continually talks about Canada not being a viable country. Do we, as Canadians, just have to accept that we are going to have to weather these insults for 4 years? Because I don't see anything anyone in Canada can do to get him to stop talking like that. Do we just have to eat this for the next 4 years?
No, we have to push back. I'm never going to accept anyone talking like that about Canada.
But how do you stop that discourse?
Our workers deserve respect. Our industry deserves respect. Our country deserves respect. We've done a lot together for generations. I think the way that I see it, this is a president that respects force, that respects resolve, that respects strength. And that's what we need to show. When we go to Washington, I always go there confident to exude that kind of thing. We are Canadians, and you know what? You have galvanized our country. Yes, we can do things together, but if you say no to Canada, you know what? We're going to be saying yes amongst ourselves, and we can diversify our industry and our economy, and we're going to do it. So I think that that's what we need, and I think the premiers being in Washington is a good thing, because we need to speak with one voice. That's another very big thing, and be united and show Canada at its best, an ambitious Canada, a confident Canada, and a confident that's not afraid, because otherwise, if you let him undermine the spirit of Canadians, that would be detrimental. We need to show force and strength and confidence.
I want to talk about what that looks like concretely. There's been more talk about a west to east pipeline. The candidate that you are backing in this leadership race, Liberal leadership race, Mark Carney, has said red tape has stopped or slowed too many energy projects in this country. As someone in government, you would bear some responsibility for red tape. Do you agree with Mark Carney on that point?
We need to do things differently.
Then your own government has been doing for 9 years.
But the world has changed, the world has changed.
But he's talking about red tape that pre-exists.
But the world has changed, and I think it's not just about government. Canadians are seeing that the rules of the game have changed. So the worst we could do is to play by the same rules when the rules have changed. We know how to win when we all abide by the same rules. So Canadians have seen that. They understand that there's a nexus between energy security, economic security, and national security. So I think we want to be resilient on this side of the border. Things that probably looked very difficult before seems to be more possible, because Canadians are with us in that, and they want Canada to be more resilient.
We are right out of time, but I promised I would ask you about the fentanyl czar. How much time does Mr. Brosseau have to show results? If there's a 30-day reprieve, is it realistic to expect him to be announcing fentanyl busts or new action in the next couple of weeks?
The work is already ongoing. Now is that we have someone who's kind of heading all these efforts, making sure that we have one big voice on that. But, it's in Canada's best interest to stop fentanyl, to stop illegal immigration, and to make sure that we show to American friends. We do it for ourselves, because when what we do at the border is to protect Canadian, is to protect our country. And when we do that, we also protect North America. So I think you'll see action.
Okay, we are right out of time. Thank you very much for being here in studio today, Minister. Appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure.
Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne.
This is another way of saying we're doing a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum without exceptions or exemptions. And that's all countries, no matter where it comes from.
That was President Donald Trump last night announcing tariffs on all steel and aluminum coming into the U.S. And that, of course, includes products from Canada. This morning, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Canada will respond, including potential dollar-for-dollar retaliation if necessary.
As usual, we hope that it will not come to that. We will work with the American administration and highlight that imports of Canadian steel and aluminum create thousands, if not millions, of jobs and support families across the United States. But Canadians will stand up strongly and firmly if we need to.
Some clarity from the White House this evening, saying the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum would be on top of the blanket tariffs, meaning the metal tariffs could total 50%. With a month to go until they come into effect, will Canada be able to make the case against those tariffs to the U.S. administration? Let's bring in the Power Panel. Amélie Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir, Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP cabinet minister, and here with me in studio, Michelle Cadario is a former Liberal National Campaign Director, and Kate Harrison is a Conservative political analyst. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Kate, I'm going to start with you. I guess the question I'm left with is, like, how does the Canadian government try to operate in this environment? Like that, the 50% stacking, like how do you even make sense of news like that? Because obviously the economic consequences would be pretty severe.
Indeed. Logic is not getting through. And I think part of the trouble right now, Catherine, is we are trying to anticipate and psychoanalyze every tweet and post and word that the president says. But what we need to be doing is making sure that our economy can withstand a lot of these changes. And I think that we can't continue to talk about the carbon tax as being separate from the tariff conversation, particularly on steel and aluminum. It was the exact industry that Mark Carney cited when talking about where he would look to make up for the consumer carbon price. So he would look to have polluters, and he cited steel and aluminum because apparently nobody uses that anymore, as a place that he would look to tax more. So we have a leader that is saying the solution here is to tax the industries that are going to be feeling this pain, as though that is totally separate and distinct from what Canadians will pay. It's ludicrous.
I understand politically why you want to drive the conversation back to the carbon tax, but is that really where you think the focus needs to be at a moment where we're hearing, like, clearly counter tariffs, trying to get through to Trump? That needs to be the point.
Retaliatory measures for sure, and there was consensus today amongst the Liberals and the Conservatives that needs to be on the table. Pierre Poilievre said today that we need to have retaliatory measures, of course. But we shouldn't keep having this conversation around a carbon tax in a bubble when we know that the industries that are going to be most hurt by that are the ones that Trump is going to levy tariffs against.
I will say, yeah, I'm going to bring Michelle in here. The conversation starts to get a bit complicated because, of course, Mr. Carney wants to remove the consumer carbon tax as we now know it. There's a lot of conversation about what industrial carbon taxes would look like under different leaders. But Michelle, you want to pick up on this?
Well,
here.
I'm just going to say, let's be clear. Mr. Poilievre has said nothing about the industrial carbon tax either. And, this is, if the Conservatives want to run an election and go into this and only talk about the carbon tax and that's all they care about, all the power to you. You stay on that bent. I don't think that's where Canadians are. I think Canadians are very focused on what can we do, how can we come together, how do we make the Americans and somebody that Mr. Trump will actually listen to and figure out who that is, because it's clearly not his, not sure it's his VP, not sure it's his Treasury Secretary, not sure who it is. But how do we make the case that he actually comprehends that by trying to hurt Canada, he's actually hurting Americans? And he's hurting them in their pocketbooks, and he's hurting them at the grocery store, and he's making the very defense investments that he wants to make all that more expensive for his government, and making the tax cuts that he wants to bring in even more unfundable because of those added costs.
But at the same time, I mean, we've been screaming that from the rooftops, both in the previous administration and since certainly the moment he was reelected. And would we argue, and I'm not being glib here, like, would we argue that has been successful? It's true we have a reprieve, but we also have this, like, sort of Damocles hanging over our heads.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I fully believe that the only thing that actually impacted Mr. Trump was that the markets moved and that they moved swiftly, because he does watch that. And that is terrifying for people who are in business.
Terrifying? Is that what just happened? No.
I think it is. I think it's very, very scary for people whose jobs are dependent on whether or not this man decides to get up and put on tariffs, and who knows what number he's going to pull out of his pocket. There's no rhyme, no reason, no logic. And all we can do is hope that he can, when he does some of these things, that there's feedback and pushback. And if it does indeed come in, that he understands that he's hurting Americans.
Andrew, I want to bring you in here. On the one hand, I do think Canadians, can't speak for all of Canada, but rather viscerally, those of us who certainly follow politics and even beyond are realizing, like, this guy is going to say a lot of things. We don't know which ones are going to materialize. We're going to get very close to the edge. We don't know if we're going to fall off the cliff at some point. But I asked Minister Champagne, is this just our reality, that he's going to sort of pummel our national identity and we're just going to have to eat it for the next 4 years? He said no. He talked about how we can fight, which is, I suppose, what you would want a political leader to say. You wouldn't want him to say, well, we're going to turtle and just all assume the fetal position. But I guess I would ask you, like, is the sort of cold, hard reality that we just have to accept that this is what the next 4 years are going to look like? Or do you think we're going to find a better way to deal with this?
Well, a lot of the strategy that has been deployed, and I think that the premiers are showing today, is that we've got to convince Americans they've got to take the case to Trump. Us taking the case to Trump, or that ridiculous thing that Stéphane Dion did over the weekend, talking about international law, that has zero impact on this guy. The only thing that's going to impact him is when he starts to realize that American manufacturing is going to hurt out of this. American consumers are going to hurt out of this. People that vote Republican are going to hurt out of this. Those are the arguments that need to be made, and I think that that's what is being made. I was impressed today by the response of the the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, talking about the impact of the aluminum tariffs would have on American workers and on American business. I was happy to see that the CEO of Ford came out and said the only thing they've gotten out of the Trump administration so far is a lot of cost and a lot of chaos. I mean, those are the arguments that carry weight, and that's what, as we think about how we make our argument, we've got to lean into those Americans to say, look, we are your allies, we are trusted trading partners, we're your friends, we are better at this if we go at this together. You've got to make the argument to Trump. And for a lot of the rest of this, it's hard to still say what Trump's end game is. Is he trying to get concessions in NAFTA? Is he trying to, rejig their tax system so he can drive further cuts and just shift more money over onto the tariff system? How much of that is his budget? We just don't know. I mean, who knows what goes on in his mind? And frankly, his administration seems to be, madly off in all directions on all issues. So, in a lot of ways, what we're doing, I think, is the right approach. I know it sounds boring. It's what we've done. The second piece, and I think this is what Mr. Champagne was talking about today, is that we also need to step up and start building Canadian capacity. Conversations that have been tough to have, we've got to bring back. Conversation around the pipelines, the conversations around our core industries. Those conversations do need to come back and think about what it is we want to make sure is secured here for Canadians.
Very quickly, Andrew, you bring up pipelines. It's something I discussed with Minister Champagne. There's no industrial proponent. There's no company right now that is stepping up to say, okay, West-East pipeline, I'm interested in that, despite that being where the political debate seems to be. So, to what, it seems to me that we're talking in circles right now about something that there isn't an actual path forward on.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly there are a number of hurdles to getting the pipelines done, and I think we saw that when Energy East was abandoned, that there was just not a political will to do it, and we've got to figure out how to create that. Maybe it is talking again about an energy corridor. I mean, Andrew Scheer proposed this at one point. Saskatchewan NDP is talking about it now. Maybe it is, that type of an approach that needs to be, really revisited and thought about. And maybe it isn't about a full reevaluation of Energy East. Maybe it is just how do we deal with the problem we've got with Line 5 cutting through the U.S. Okay. Is there a more secure way for us to do that? Let's just think about getting those first steps going and figure out where it takes us after that.
Emily, I recall hearing you on air, I think several weeks ago now, saying, where are our allies? As the conversation shifts a bit when we're talking about tariffs that are going to affect the world, although fundamentally it seems principally Canada, given what big exporters we are of both aluminum and steel, where is your head at now in terms of Canada's ability to work with allies to try to change the tide?
How are those?
Although I appreciate the importance of what's happening today in Washington with basically all the premiers and a lot of the cabinet in Ottawa being down there, to me the most interesting political development is actually happening in Europe with the meeting that's happening between Justin Trudeau and the European leaders, but also between Justin Trudeau and the Secretary General of NATO. I think that's where we're at. There is only so much you can do to argue about how Canada and the United States have a win-win relationship when it comes to the economy, when you are sitting in front of a person who believes that basically all relationships have a winner and a loser, and that it's really important for him to come out as the winner. And I think that's the approach that Donald Trump has proved to have had in his entire career, actually as a real estate person way before he was in politics. And so we're trying to talk about win-win deals when Donald Trump doesn't believe that win-win deals actually exist. And so that's why going around him and talking to the other people who are going to be affected by his policies should be a really important priority right now. And actually, the fact that the aluminum tariffs are threatening not just Canada, but basically everyone, helps us make that case and go around Donald Trump, and also not just build your relationship with Europe, but also with the other countries in the Americas who have the same problem that we have, is that they're also always dependent as well on American importation, and that they will be looking at other possible players to be making trade with, and that player could absolutely be Canada. And so I think that's something that we need to have more of an eye on, as well as, looking at ourselves and making sure that we're making the best for ourselves. And one last thing on aluminum, I just want to point out that there's one factory doing aluminum in BC, but everyone else is in Quebec, and that there is no carbon tax in Quebec. And so the very fact that there was even a conversation between the carbon tax and aluminum makes no sense. And it's really important to understand that this nationalism that people are putting forward is Canadian nationalism, but it's also provincial nationalism in some ways, and that people will be trying to look out for their own, and that includes obviously Quebec as well, which is an indirect way to answer the conversation about Energy East. It's going to be about putting Canada first, but I think that Alberta is going to try to put Alberta first. Quebec will be trying to do the same, and it's going to be hard when it comes to negotiating actual deals for sometimes provincial leadership also to not just put their own provinces first as well.
And Kate, federally, how can that be grappled with? Because it is it's a very interesting dynamic, this rising sense of patriotism, because people are ticked right off at Donald Trump, but at the same time, seeing in the front window the possibility of these provincial pressures that might sort of pit us against each other.
Yeah, I think it is a time to get serious about what the country should be focused on in terms of economic sovereignty. And a lot of the conversations around trade diversification should have been happening well before now. There are things that we can do to better prepare Canada, including making us more hospitable to investment and looking to be the place where countries do business. I think the carbon tax is very much a part of that equation, but also a lot of these conversations and ideas and proposals, while valuable, should be discussed in Parliament. And right now we are not sitting. We are having fancy meetings in Toronto with the same 200 people that get in a room every time there's a fancy meeting in Toronto, and expecting that to drive different thinking and different decision making. So for all the talk of Team Canada, it falls pretty flat when we can't even bring Parliament together to discuss some of these ideas as Parliament.
I'd like you to pick up on that point, Michelle, because it is, I'll say as a journalist, it feels quite strange that there is so much happening in the country, and to not see that debate happening. How defensible is it that Parliament isn't sitting right now?
Well, we're in a unique situation where there's a leadership going on, and let's face it, the Conservatives don't want to bring the Parliament back to have a conversation, to have an active debate, to have a really fulsome kind of exchange of views and values across the country and try and put forward things. They want to have they want to go in so they can call an election and dissolve it for the next 2 months. So,
which would be a reflection of the will of the legislature.
You can't not show up to work because you're afraid you're going to get fired.
They are working. They are doing things. And I think that right now, probably what Canadians actually want people to, I'm not sure that they think that nothing happens because the House is sitting or isn't sitting. I would suspect that most have no idea whether it is or it isn't. I don't think anyone misses question period. I think what the expectation is that they're putting forward the priorities that they need to do to be able to avoid those tariffs at all costs. And whatever we can do to do that, and to be ready. And if they do come in, having a package that is ready to go, and if that has to go through Parliament, then of course there would be an expectation to bring it back. But right now, when we're just having a conversation without knowing what the actual action is that you're responding to, I think it's disingenuous in terms of what the Conservatives are asking for, in my opinion.
Okay.